下面是国际新闻。外国专注于中共国的活跃对冲基金的数量自2012年以来首次下滑，截至今年上半年，仅推出了5只新基金，另有18只基金被清算。请看详情内容。外国投资者正对中共国失去兴趣。
What's the current state of Chinese hedge funds, especially those offshore ones?
Investors are bemoaning that it's the end of an era for offshore Chinese hedge funds. It's the first time that China-focused hedge funds have actually dropped in figures in terms of active funds, according to Preqin, since at least 2012. As of this year, for the first half, only 5 new funds were launched and 18 have been liquidated. The contraction marks a stark shift in trend for this group of investors who at one point accounted for at least half of the new funds raised out of Asia. So a lot of them are shifting gear and shifting strategy as of this point.
What's the motivation for this, Lulu?
I think it's a combination of the fact that a lot of them are struggling to raise new funds and also bad returns. That's caused by the combination of escalating tensions between the U.S. and China, which have caused them to struggle in new fundraising, but also because of the crackdowns that we saw coming out of China in the past few years. This group was really focused on investing in e-commerce, education, and also platform companies, technology companies in China, which have led to pretty bruising returns in the past few years.
So what's the strategy then for some of these funds?
So what we're seeing is some of them are shifting gear in terms of where the money is coming from. For backers, there is a shift to raise capital out of Middle East or also Africa. Also, in terms of strategy, a lot of are shifting from China-focused hedge funds into Pan-Asia strategy or even global stock pickers. So it is going to be quite a shuffling for this industry that was once quite high-flying.
Biden, meanwhile, citing an executive order yesterday narrowly limiting U.S. investments in China. This is supposed to start next year. The order bans new private equity, venture capital, and joint venture investments in chips, quantum computing, and certain AI companies. It also requires Americans doing business in China to report direct investments in those sectors to the U.S. government. China is saying this morning that it is, quote, gravely concerned about the order and that it reserves the right to respond. Joining me right now is Atlas Organization founder and author of The Decisive Decade, Jonathan D.T. Ward. Jonathan, it's great to see you. Thanks very much. And you write about this threat in The Decisive Decade, particularly the capital markets threat, the fact that investors are able to buy Chinese companies that are listed here in so many indexes and ETFs, and in effect are able to fund the expansion of communist China. What is your reaction to this executive order?
Hi, Maria. Well, it's important, and it's a very well-written executive order. It actually declares a national emergency to deal with this threat, the threat being advancements in military technology and technology that's relevant to cyber capabilities, surveillance, and the Chinese military itself. So I think it actually sets a groundwork for something that could go far broader and ultimately become a real bedrock of U.S. strategy and policy towards China. So that's all good. On the other hand, it's still very narrowly targeted. Again, AI, quantum, semiconductors, those are very important sectors, and I think it shows that the Biden administration has a technology strategy, but I wouldn't call this a capital market strategy. I mean, it's not the same, for example, of what Representative Gallagher sent to MSCI and to Larry Fink that says, hey, look, our pensions and everything are still pouring capital into China. That will probably continue through all kinds of other investment vehicles, but this is starting to, I think, take the broader administration technology strategy and, add a capital markets dimension to it, which means that, if we can slow them down in key technologies, if we're able to secure our supply chains, maintain a technological advantage, make sure that remains a military advantage for us. That's all good for the United States, but we still have a much larger, much broader economic and military competition.
中共房地产商持续暴雷，前有恒大，现有碧桂园，对中共经济带来致命打击。日本内阁府对中共地产的评估报告最新出炉，请看相关报道。日本将中共地产市场视为全球经济风险。
14号。日本内阁府发布了分析报告《世界经济潮流》，作为未来的风险因素，提及中共国的房地产市场以及地方财政恶化或导致经济下行，并认为有必要关注中共国年轻人失业率的上升。报告指出，解决或缓和美中围绕半导体的贸易摩擦并非易事。据报告分析，中共国房地产市场的低迷导致地方政府依赖的土地使用权转让收入减少。 此外，地方政府存在不计入官方统计的隐形债务，一旦地产企业、地方财政等破产，货币紧缩、消费者信心等下滑，恐怕将脱离经济。报告还就中共国年轻人失业指出，由于应届大学毕业生增加的同时，白领岗位数不足等，城市的16至24岁劳动力失业率创历史新高。除消费与地产交易停滞外，还可能导致产能低迷。关于美中摩擦，报告认为，美国国内增设半导体生产基地、锂离子电池转移至北美生产等趋势，未来仍将继续。此外，在美中经济脱钩和美中摩擦的背景下，报告强调各国必须努力避免内向型经济。郭先生在2020年12月2号爆料，碧桂园在马来西亚的地产项目的真实目的是打造中共的东南亚洗钱和情报基地。
Economic strategy. But let's start first with the Chinese economy. How much trouble is it in?
It's in a lot of trouble. I think the backstory here is that for a couple decades, really, China's economic growth was powered by credit, a huge expansion in bank lending and other forms of, gray market, quasi-official credit that would float around in the ecosystem of China's economy. And a lot of that found its way into real estate, to the point where in recent years, real estate accounted for about a third of China's GDP every year by some count. So, I mean, this is a huge unbalanced economy that was based on an asset price bubble. And a few years ago, Beijing realized that something had to change about that this was not sustainable. So the Chinese authorities have been gradually trying to deflate that real estate bubble. It seems to be working. The problem is they haven't worked out what the alternative is going to be. And I think that alternative should involve a lot of private entrepreneurship, enterprise, really leaning into the market reform process that China had started in the 80s. For political reasons, the Communist Party has been very resistant to that and has been trying to increase state control of the economy. And that is the core of the problem that they have now. They've realized that they can't do the debt-fueled, real estate-driven economic growth that they had before, but they haven't made their peace with what a successful alternative economy would look like instead.
刘特佐还有刘特佐的爹在马来西亚槟城整个地方搞房地产，包括代理碧桂园和马来西亚之间建立的碧桂园城。这个城市它就是目的要再建一个新加坡，未来要在马来西亚独立出去。那个地方就是要给共产党洗钱和东南亚的一个情报机构。整个这个项目发展全是刘特佐的爹和刘特佐、孟建柱、孙立军干的。所有的湄公河岸所谓的灭黑行动，把黑社会人抓到云南判刑，就是孟建柱整个霸占东南亚，把整个黑帮赌场、走私木头、珠宝全部一把拿下。这是其中海外最关键的。大家看马来西亚高铁项目1000多亿，贷款将近500-600亿，包括潜水艇项目，包括的当时无人机项目，长虹无人机全部是由刘特佐和刘特佐他爹来做的，然后彻底帮助纳吉布选举当上总理，然后控制马来西亚所有的银行经济。马航飞机失踪案件绝对跟江家、孟建柱和刘特佐是有关系。